Welcome back, everybody, to the Sharpest College Football Podcast. This is our podcast reset where we get you back up to speed on all the basics of the podcast, what we do, how we talk, a little bit of how we think and feel, and basically just the lay of the land here for the podcast. Probably want to refer back to this as you go through our conference previews. This is BuckMetrics, joined as always by Robert Martin. Robert, good to see you again. How have you been?
Pretty good, yeah. We've been off for several months here. The last time you guys saw us was, I think, it between Christmas and New Year's.
Yeah, I
It was
think it
something
was,
along that
yeah.
lines, yeah. Before the New Year's bowls, we didn't do another thing after that because there's only a handful of games left. But yeah, it's been a crazy couple of months in terms of college football. A lot of things, some things have changed, some haven't. But yeah, this season is shaping up very interesting. We had our first 12-team college football playoff just last year, and we're still digesting the results from that and how that worked. But yeah, it's good to be back. And yeah, and one thing I will say though is for this podcast, we're back this year as usual. But yeah, for people who maybe caught on to us maybe mid year or towards the end of last year, because we did have some new viewers coming in towards the end of the year. For those people, this is a great explainer podcast of who we are, what we do, the kind of data we use, how that stuff works. So if you're relatively new, if you're starting with us this year, great. That's great. If you kind of started with us late last year and you kind of have some questions about how we do some of the stuff here, this is the podcast for you. So yeah, we're just kicking off this year. This is a great place to dive right in on who we are and what we do.
Well said, like a man who is more polished and patient than I am. So with that, let's get going. What are we? What do we do here? Basically, first of all, I'll give a little overview of my model, then my terminology, and Robert can go into his. So, my model, basically, what I do is every week I grab per play data, not play by play, but per play data for all games between two FBS opponents. I basically crunch the heck out of that. The crunching and massaging includes normalizing for strength of opponent. If I want to brag a little bit, I think that we are pretty much at the elite end of the spectrum when it comes to that, and that's what one of the things that really separates us. Based on the massaging, I get an offensive and defensive power rating for each team. Not mentioned here is I also combine those and normalize for venue, road, home, and difficulty of venue to get a total power rating for each team. Identify the planes or the plays based on the variance of my projections versus both the line and the total. One thing that's important to remember is I've found that I need at least 4 weeks worth of data. So I have no model plays versus for weeks 1 0 through 4. I do have some opinions. My opinions are that of somebody who's just smart enough to build a great model. I'm smart to have some sharp opinions, but not nearly as sharp as my model, as they say. So that's basically how my model works. If you want really more detail, feel free to reach out to me. Just leave a comment below on YouTube or whatever. If you're watching on YouTube, or send me a message on I'm going to still call it Twitter at BuckMetrics. I should probably have that somewhere here. Here's my glossary for the terminology I use. I just talked about the offensive, defensive, and the total power ratings. One thing to remember about that is the average FBS team is 0.0 for each of offensive, defensive, and total power rating. Apex is probably one of the most used metrics that I kick around throughout the whole season and preseason. Basically, it's can be for a quarterback or a team, depending on how I grab the data. It's that passing efficiency based on yards per attempt and interceptions. One thing that's really important is that the average FBS quarterback has a apex of 100. Go up and down from there. Higher is better. I should probably make a note right now. I will put higher is better here. Also note that we have defense. There's a defensive apex too. And in the off season, I guess last season to get into a little bit. Last season I kept on saying, boy, if you're a MAC team and you have a bad defensive apex, you're truly bad because nobody in this league can throw the ball outside of, I think, Toledo. So I came up with the Apex Plus. Basically, that's not just standardizing to FBS average. That's also really controlling for the strength of an opponent. For Apex, it's going to be for the opponent's passing defense. And for defensive Apex, it's going to be for the strength of the opponent's passing offense. Apex, I use it throughout the whole year. Next one, GGAB stands for, and I clever, my creative side kicked it on this, Robert. When I created the metric a few years ago, was ground game above Boston College because they had the worst rushing offense in all of FBS. Bill O'Brien has fixed that, so I'm going with a ground game above basement. How about that? It worked.
That
So basically, what that's saying is, okay, based on the number of rushes in this game, what would the worst rushing offense do? And then how many yards did I get above that? So it's not a counting statistic, but as I say here, it's a cumulative statistic. I like this because, and I guess one of the genesis, obviously, just being descriptive. I like this a lot more than just yards per average because if you look back at the Mike Leach offenses at Washington State, he really, as I like to say, he really made light bend when it came to rushing stats. He actually had a really good rushing per average stats, especially when he had a good running quarterback, but they were not a running team. The cumulative aspect of this really accounts for who can really run the ball and make the other team pay or basically put the game on the offense's terms. And I have a GGAB plus along the same lines. This adjusts for the strength of your opponent. And like Apex, there is a GGAB and a defensive GGAB. Lower is better on defense. And I also have a defensive GGAB plus as well. Pretty interesting. One of my data points on that was I always had Mississippi. Yeah, Mississippi. That's it. I always had them like the top 3 rush defenses. I don't know if you remember that for almost all of last year. And I just thought that a lot of that was probably due to maybe getting some not so great run offenses. And GGAB Plus kind of dispels that. I think that they're still top 3 by GGAB Plus on the defensive side. Okay, Ryan. Ryan stands for receiving yards above newbie or noob, as the people under 55 say. Basically, it's akin to GGAB. It's saying for number of receptions that a team or a receiver has. If I take that number of receptions and I say, okay, a replacement level or a newbie would have, I think, X yards per reception. How many more above that do I have? So this is also a cumulative stat. I love this one in that I actually ran this by a couple of years ago by someone who's actually a Blitnikoff award voter, and he really liked this. I didn't give him the secret sauce about how I calculate it, but he really liked it. This is not a predictive, it's a descriptive. It basically, as much as anything, it's a cumulative measure of receiving explosiveness, is how I like to characterize it. I've got 4 other here. These are more on the preseason bent. When I'm talking about offensive lines and defenses, I use these 4 metrics. RS is returning starts. Basically, it's saying how many of each of the 5 linemen and the 11 defensive starters for this team, how many starts did they have for this team last year? It is for this team last year. It's not for anywhere in FBS. It's just for this team because I want to basically measure just the continuity in terms of the squad, offensive line or defense. Career starts is different. That's going to be for the number of starts anywhere at FBS for each returning starter, just to give more of a measure of total football experience at the FBS level. Don't include FCS starts. PYLC stands for prior year learning curve. It measures how many returning starts of the returning starts up here, this metric right here. How many of those were in what I call the learning curve period? I basically have a theory about the first X number of starts are when a player is going up a learning curve. If you've seen me on Twitter, as he still calls it, you'll see that I spend about 2 weeks gritting out all the returning experience. It's a blessing and a curse. It's a little mind-numbing at times, but I get a really good feel for where there are pockets of exceptional improvement and where we're not. Prior year learning curve basically implies the higher number is how much improvement should I see on this squad this year versus last year. If you just think of an offensive line that had 5 guys that were all getting their first career starts as sophomores, so they all had career starts 0 through, let's say they play in a bowl game, 13. Clearly, those 5 guys, if they all return this year, are going to be much better in year 2. So it's my attempt to quantify that. You think basically if you have those same guys now in year 3, from year 2 to 3, there's still going to be some improvement, but it's not going to be nearly as dramatic as from year 1 to 2. So that's what I'm trying to quantify with my PYLC. And the last one here, prime starts. So that's the other side of it. That's saying if I assume a 10-game season for the upcoming, how many of each starters, if I project 10 starts for them this year, how many of them are going to be past that learning curve? I consider that to be their prime performance territory of their career. Limited to 10 games, so there's apples to apples. So a perfect score for an offensive line would be 50. A perfect for a defense would be 110. Might want to do a screen grab of this. I'm sure we'll be referring back to this throughout our conference previews. Robert, your model now.
Yeah, my model is a little bit different. It uses some of the same basic philosophy, that kind of yards per play is the most predictive metric. You use that in your data, and I use it in mine. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, we've had a lot of success with that. But mine comes at it a bit of a different way. Mine basically says, okay, so we have all these yards per play data. That sounds a lot like almost a game of football, but let's actually make it a game of football. So basically, my model is basically it's a very basic Madden simulation. Remember how you play Madden and you're playing with your friend and you're like, you know what, we don't want to play right now. Let's just we sit back, we have the two computers play off against each other and we see what happens. And so you could do that. You could do that, and it's like a screensaver mode. You just sit back, just watch a game happen, right? That's what I do. I do that for each game every week about 1,000 times, and then I extract the results from that game. So, for example, it says, oh, in 90% of the time, Archie Manning threw for one touchdown pass, and 85% of the time he threw for two, right? That's the thing. So I extract all this data, and then I basically compound it, and that's what the model generates. It basically, as you average the results for every single game, every single 1,000 game in that 1,000 data set, you get a spread. Now that spread isn't nice. It's not a 3, it's like a 2.8, but we'll call it a 3. But that's the thing. It's a very powerful predictive model. And because it uses some of those advanced stats, it's not necessarily always just using play by play data. It also has stats on pressure rates, which I find very predictive for quarterbacks. The model itself is actually, and some people think this is really cool. Some people think it's a bit crazy, but I tend to think it's pretty cool. It's actually based on the fundamentals of Pokemon, with the fact that in Pokemon you have different types, right? Grass type super effective against water type, is super effective against fire type, in the same way that a team that's really good at running the ball will be super effective against a team that has a really bad run defense. And while other models like Buck's model and other models definitely pick up on that, they say, okay, this is a problem, and they can determine that. I find that in some cases, that just having that adjustment, if one team is so good at something and the team is so bad at something, sometimes those yards by play adjustments are just not capturing the depth of it. So in my model is a bit more out there. It's very unique. It's very different, which is both a positive and negative. When it makes a call on something, it can make a straight up call. There's been couple of times when the model has said that, like, it's like the spread is 3.5, and my model says no, this team is going to win by 20 points, and then it does. That's insane, right? When that happens, that's crazy, and that happens quite a lot, actually, surprisingly. But there's also times when it says something is going to happen in a game, and that is not even remotely close to what happens in that game. And I think some people would say that and be like, oh, this model's horrible. It had a bad call in this game. I will take the games that it calls, like the 3 games that it calls perfectly versus the one game it has a problem. I make that trade because as a bettor, we know expected value. We know that, okay, yeah, we'll have that one game. That's fine. That sucks. But the other 3 games, we'll take those wins in those games because we know that's plus EV. So my model makes more out there calls, but I will find that more often than not, it's usually correct. And usually those calls are, hey, this 14-point favorite has a chance. This 14-point underdog has a chance in this game. That's generally what it does. And you'd be surprised how often we're like, I swear, sometimes it's like it used to be Pac 12 after dark, now it's Big 12 after dark. It's these games where it's, oh, there's a 14-point underdog. And my model has them only losing by 2. And sure enough, we're like in the fourth quarter and they lose by like a field goal or a touchdown or something. And I made money off of that game. But that's the thing, right? So it's it's the good with the bad, but I think it definitely has a lot more good than bad.
Yeah, and what's interesting too, I think I don't know if you'd call it complementary, but what's interesting is how our models are different at the extremes. Your model kind of gets a little carried away with runaway games, I guess I'd call it. I remember at one point you had USC scoring 100 points, which I would have
Yeah.
been delighted to see, but it didn't happen. And mine, at the other side of it, I'm just taking per play data, not play by play. So I tend to maybe underrate a little bit the best teams as they blow out teams, and you're not getting their full effort for 4 quarters or their best players. And similarly, the really bad teams that get blown out, a lot of the opponents will just show mercy, not even try after the halfway through the third quarter. So it's interesting that those kind of complement each other, and I think will exclude some games not to play. And on that topic, as he goes to the next slide here, that would be a dual model play. What is a dual model play? It looks to both my model. Oh, I lean toss up. Got to fix that. And Robert's
Actually,
model.
let me just clarify that for a second. Yeah, so this show and this channel is currently called Lean Toss Up. We're going to transition away from that name and go fully to the Sharpest College Football Podcast. The only reason for that is that Lean Toss Up was originally associated with like election forecasting. And to be honest, the website is like now 99% sports modeling. So yeah, probably could use a different name. So we're going to transition again. Same podcast, same people, same data, but the name doesn't really make much sense anymore. Originally, Lean Tossup was conceived as a way for basically a resume for me to get a job in politics, and that worked. Mission accomplished. So I think we can retire that name with massive success there. Yes.
Yes, congratulations on that. We'll touch on that a little more in the next episode here. So it looks at both of our models. Excuse the typo, everybody, please. We're working out all the off-season rust here, as we say. As I say, I don't have any models or any model data that's sufficiently mature until week 5. So there's no dual model plays before then, as we're looking at both models. And basically, it's saying where I have and my model and Robert's model both have a variance to either the total or the spread of 7 or more. It's a play. Simple enough. Some of the differences are fascinating. Some of them are comical. And if we skip ahead to the next slide here, the ones where we split, we always, if I jump ahead here a little bit to my third bullet point, where we disagree in our podcast, we do a separate, after we do our regular part 1 and part 2 try to do it on Mondays, get them out on Tuesdays, where we do a week in review, and then in part 1 and part 2, we go over my metrics. I sometimes a deeper dive, and then the previews and plays for the week. But where we disagree, we bring in our friend Step on a Duck, and we have a separate podcast called Island Time, where we basically talk about these ones that we disagree on and just hash out what do we think on these. Really understand, try to figure out why our models really just are predicting why and why we're different. It's interesting if you love college football and this kind of thinking man's or thinking woman's approach to it. It's fun and pretty heady stuff. I'm looking forward to Island Time.
Yeah, and one thing I will say about I love Island Time for that reason again, and it's partly that, it's partly stats too. If you're a numbers person, 100%, that's a great podcast to talk about as well. One thing I will say though about the dual model plays, and this is where it's, and we've mentioned this so many times on the podcast, and sometimes some weeks we'll mention it, is that like when I because we compile our models independently, right? I do it and then I send my data to Buck, and then he runs his as well. There are so many times, and I'm sure he has stories of this too, where I'm like, that's a weird result in that game. And then hey, I have that one. Then the second it's, he has it too. Okay, we're betting that now. Like right now, we're like, there are so many times like that. And it's crazy how it's like, the second I'm like, my model's saying something weird, and then his model is like, okay, yeah, we're betting that right now. And it's just like, it's not even like, I mean, obviously with the dual model plays, it's a 7 or more thing. So if like there's someone who's like a 4-point favorite and we have him as 10, that hits as a play. But there's times when it's, we both like this 14-point dog. Okay, it's stuff like that. It's like, this isn't extreme stuff. We think there's some value on the spread. No, this is like, people, if this happens, people will be talking about this on Monday, and sure enough, people like a week later, people are talking about that massive upset. It's like the models are crazy in that way that they are able to see some of this stuff.
You didn't mention the very specific example, like the podcast favorite in 2023.
Yeah,
both our models had New Mexico State straight up to win outright at Auburn. And the number moved against us too. I remember it opened at like 22.5 and it got up to 25 or so by kick. Never a doubt though. Never a doubt. The great Jerry Kill.
I know, yeah, and that is one example too. There's been a ton of other examples too, but yeah, that's the most notable, right? That game was like, we both saw that line. I think in that podcast we were like, no, like in that podcast that we were just like, no, that's not happening, and it didn't happen, right? It was just like, there's no way they're winning by 25 points, and they just lost outright. Like it wasn't even close.
It wasn't close.
And again, it's crazy that you dominate as a 25-point underdog, but that's what happened in that game, and it's insane. But yeah, like that's the thing. No, I mean, there's so many examples of like when we just say, nope, that line is wrong. And like there was that example. I guess we're gonna kick on Auburn here because there was, I think it was earlier that year, it was Auburn versus Penn State. The line was like Penn State -3. Like, that's wrong. They lost by 20. There's so many
Yeah.
examples of we just say this line is wrong, and it just, yeah, that line was just wrong. And there's a lot. There's obviously times that the lines are right, but there's sometimes with, no, this is, it misses something, and there's reasons why books do that. There's sometimes a team is a very public team, a lot of money on that team, so they have to shorten that line, and that's what the advantage of having these models is, because we can take advantage of that. When the line is shorter than it should be, and the books know it, our model sees that, and we're able to exploit that advantage. So
Yeah, it's interesting too. And believe me, I'm not to get too political or personal here. I'm a CPA. I'm on the board of a company. I'm a executive consultant, so I'm all about market forces and everything, so such. But I think people get a little too deferential to like the wisdom of the market, because there are pockets, and this is where we live and thrive and eat. There are pockets where the market is just wrong, or I guess I'd say very late. Maybe we should call ourselves the earliest podcast, because we're early to really spot the trends and the surprises. So, all right, so that's the what. So, why? Why do you want to listen to us? First of all, as I like to say, we are fluent in all of FBS. There are a lot of podcasts and I'll say a lot of podcasts that like to talk about the Power Four. Some try to go into the G5, and most of them pretend to know. It seems like most of the people that really know the G5 don't really, what do I say, aren't as really, I guess, concerned about the Power Four, more or less. So Robert and I, and then we talk to basically our regular guests and the people that we have on our conference previews. They basically are a good combination. We all know both sides of that divide of power and group of five.
yeah, I'll make a point on that too. Yeah, there are some podcasts out there that focus on the bigger leagues, right? Like Big Ten, SEC. They're like, oh, we got to talk about the Big Ten game of the week. We don't. Sometimes I think sometimes we'll give it a passing reference if there's like a big game in the SEC, or if, oh, it's Alabama Georgia this week, or maybe we'll talk about it a little bit. But the way we view college football is that, okay, this is what, 120, what is it? I don't even know what it is now. What is it? 130 teams in FBS, something like that. Yeah. So that's
34, I think now. Yeah.
134. Yeah. So now you're looking. So basically, every week, that is, if my math is correct, 60 some odd games, 60 some odd chances that we have value in that game. And I don't care if I'm betting on a game that is going to have 100,000 people attended or 20,000 people attended. If I see value on something, I'm going to bet that, right? That's the thing. And I know that's what a lot of podcasts will focus on. They'll focus on the big game. They're like, oh, we're going to talk about the game that you're going to be tuning in on ESPN or NBC and watching. I don't care, because the -110 line is the same whether or not the game's on NBC or ESPN4, right? It's the same line. I could still bet the same props. I could still bet the same stuff. And as a matter of fact, I might actually get more value on that game that's on ESPN4, because no one else cares about that. That's the thing. There's so much more money on the other ones that we can take advantage of that. For example, there was another game that we called as well. It was Miami versus, this was still was it Old Dominion, or who was it? It was.
Was that no? Oh my gosh!
I know. I'm trying to remember what it was now.
Texas A&M to App State.
Texas A&M and App State was one. No, wasn't it? Because it was a Miami game. They were playing someone and they lost outright, I believe, as 20-something dogs.
Okay,
and it
well,
was
in fairness, that happens every year with Mario.
That does happen a lot, yes. But I remember watching that game because I had basically not a ton of money, but I was it was insane value in that game. And I remember watching that game, and there wasn't a first down line. That's a level of production in this game. And I'm winning so much money off this game. There's no first down line. And but it doesn't matter if there's a first down, a virtual first down line in the broadcast or not. It's still a chance to win money. And that's the way you have to approach it, right? Sometimes you find value on a Tuesday night Conference USA game. Sometimes it's a Pac-12 introductory game. Sometimes it's a Hawaii game that you're watching on that one app thing. There's so many different ways you can play this. You have to find your spots no matter which team are playing. And to be fair, there's interesting storylines across all of FBS. It's a lot of people will focus on the big schools, but honestly, in many cases, people overhype some of these storylines. Sometimes with some of these schools, there's far more interesting stuff happening in the other parts of FBS. So that's my take on it. Yeah.
And it's not just, okay, we just check a box score and say, okay, now I know one name or something.
Yeah.
Look at this lovely T-shirt. We love, maybe not all the teams, but we love these conferences. We love Conference USA. I love Conference USA.
Oh,
I will
yeah.
also say that the podcast that just, if you have a typical, just all they do is SEC, I'm sure that they know the depth charts and the coaching staffs better than we do. But I would say that we objectively know who's better more than I'd say 95% of those podcasts, just because we have opinions, but when it comes to basically who's better, we are ruthlessly objective, which is pretty rare. A lot of podcasts in this space are just all about opinions, and we have opinions in part one where we say who did stupid stuff this week and who did a good job, and make fun of basically Pat Narduzzi and Mario. But when it comes to really being saying who's better, it's just I really don't have an opinion. My numbers are going to be much better than I am when it comes to that. All right. Another reason we document all our picks and how we do weekly. I've gotten into it with a couple of people on, he still calls it Twitter, about you don't really win this rate. We'll get to that in a second. But we do. We document every pick that we make, and then the next week we follow up so that you see exactly how we're doing. Yeah, I unfortunately picked a really bad week for Robert here. This is a couple years ago.
This was a couple
Robert
years
went
ago,
0-4, but he was still ahead for the week and for the year. And the dual model players are doing very well through week 13 a couple weeks ago. Also, as we said, value determines plays. It's not a I think. You're going to see in the first 4 weeks, we'll have basically I think, but that's not a dual model play. And we go to pains to make sure that people understand that. I bring this up. This is the 2003 bowl season. We had only one play. And I would challenge you to find any other podcast that is literally that, as I say, ruthlessly objective, to say, hey, there's only value in one game. That's all we're going to give out. Did we have other? I don't know. I probably played 2 other games for probably literally like 0.1 unit, but we stick to the process. And I don't know. Maybe people like just have opinions, but I don't know. People like Witchcraft Coup and Hocus Pocus. You're getting the absolute best here. Looked like you want to say something there, Robert. Sorry.
No, I agree, right? It's a lot of the time it is hard to try to find like as a better, right? It's sometimes you always want to bet on that big game, right? Oh, this big game on ESPN at 7 o'clock. You want to bet on Alabama, Georgia, or all that stuff. But sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it's not worth it. It doesn't make sense from a betting standpoint to bet on that game. And sometimes the best play is just to not bet on that, right? That's the thing. Just watch it, enjoy it. And maybe if you have an opinion, like you're like, oh, I think Georgia is like a 5-point favorite, but the spread is like Georgia -3. And then maybe if Alabama scores first, you get like Georgia +1 or something or +2. Then there's different ways you can play it, but they're a good sign of a good bettor is restraint, not always betting on every single last option. You're not trying to force a play just for no reason.
Yeah, I'm a big horse racing fan too, and one of the biggest determinants of if they're a winning bettor or not at the horse races is literally like knowing what races to not bet on and having the discipline to do that. And that is probably the biggest difference, because most people are pretty good. I don't know. Most of the people that show up a lot are pretty good at handicapping. It's really understanding, okay, where I do or do not have where I think an advantage of an opinion here versus the market. All right. Yeah, another reason is we win at a professional rate here. Over 3 seasons in the podcast, the dual model plays hit at 59.1%. People think that 55% is break even, and actually 55% is where you get what the professionals strive for. 52.5%, if you actually do the math, guys, is break even. So over 3 years, we're looking at an ROI of almost 13%. What's interesting too about this slide is I just noticed this last night. The more plays in a season, the lower the ROI. I don't know if you noticed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is true. That's interesting.
Yeah. That's why you want to stick with us. That's why. Robert, anything else in this primer before we call this an episode?
No, I think that's all we have to say for this part 1 of the new season. And yeah, we got a lot more to say. Stick with us.
Yes. So thank you, everybody. Stay tuned. We'll have more episodes coming out shortly.
Thank you.